If there were to be some large-scale world war or civil war, it would be between now and 2033. There's going to be a 6-year depression from 2030 through 2036, and the recovery period in the stock market is going to be upwards of 18 years. The only thing that would change this time frame. So I'm sure you obviously know about The Fourth Turning and Neil Howe's book, and I think it's a great book, but it only goes back a handful of centuries, so just I think 300 or 400 years. And there are some exceptions in his model. There's another book called Pendulum. This is from Roy H. Williams. He's actually the highest paid advertiser in the world, and he's been the highest paid advertiser in the world for 25 years due to how he gets compensated. But as a highly paid advertiser, he picks up on patterns. He picks up on human behaviors. And he noticed these two different 40-year periods that go back and forth, back and forth. He actually went back and researched 3,000 years. So Neil Howe with The Fourth Turning only went back about 400. He went back 3,000 years to Solomon's time, and he noticed there was always two subsequent 40-year periods or generations, right? So generations in the Bible is mentioned 52, 54 times, and it's always referring to 40 years, right? A generation. Well, what he came up with, which is absolutely fascinating, he's in the movie, but you have the 40-year me generation followed by a 40-year we generation. And you can see this show up in the media. If it's more recent, you can see it show up in the architecture. You could see it show up in the music or the art. You could see it show up in the leadership. You could even see it show up in various big events. The me generation's obviously focused on me. What am I going to get out of it? My expression. Whereas the we generation is focused on the collective good. And it's interesting because the reason why history repeats itself is because the people who went through what we're going through last time are no longer here to tell us about it because it was 80 years ago. What's so fascinating is the 10-year upswing to the peak or the zenith of a we generation and the 10-year downswing. This 20-year period out of the 80 is where all of the viciousness is. It's where all of the rage, all of the wars, World War II, Civil War, Revolutionary War, the Crusades, the burning at the stake, the Salem witch trials, the beheadings, they're always in this 20-year period of time on the upswing and then the downswing behind the peak or the zenith of a we generation. Well, we hit the peak or the zenith of the we generation in 2023, which means from 2013 through 2023 at the peak, and then from 2023 through 2033, if there were to be some large-scale world war or civil war, it would be between now and 2033, based on the pendulum theory. It's a fascinating book. But we talk about that because the Great Depression, this is ITR's stance, which I think is interesting. The 5 big reasons, number one is demographics. You can't just make more babies out of nowhere, right? We have a shortage of 50-year-olds that are in their peak earning years, paying the most amount in taxes and covering the rising costs of all these different expenditures for the aging boomer population. I call it the silver-haired tsunami. Well, the boomers, the demographic issue is critical. It's not just critical here in America, it's critical in Japan, South Korea, China, Europe, Italy, Germany. There's a lot of countries that are in really bad shape because of demographics. And then there's countries that are going to do very well over the next handful of decades, like India or Sub-Saharan Africa. Their average population's around 28, which they're going to crush it over the upcoming decades. But demographics is like a cruise ship. You can't turn it around instantly. That also is what leads to the other 4 issues, which is going to be obviously government debt. It's ballooning. He's printing more money than Biden, actually. Republicans don't like to talk about that, but he's just as bad. And that's been the case going back for 50 years. So you've got the government debt, you've got inflation. We think inflation is going to continue upwards. I mean, with the dollar being debased, with what's going on in the Middle East, with oil crisis, all of that is going to lead to higher inflation. And we're not talking about the CPI number. I call it the CPI number because it doesn't factor in all these other issues like food and energy and mortgages and rent and things like that. So it's not a real number. It's a manipulated number that's designed to deceive. So you got inflation, then you've got our healthcare costs. Holy cow, what a disaster that is. I mean, we bring in about $5 trillion in tax revenue a year. By 2028, our tax costs as a country is going to reach over $8 trillion. How are we going to pay for all this? And then fifth and finally, unfunded liabilities. You can look this up on Google, but over the next 75 years, between Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security disability, government pensions, we have somewhere between 150 and 200 trillion in unfunded liabilities. We bring in 5 trillion a year. How are we going to pay for all this? So those 5 things, just from the economic standpoint, let alone what you're talking about, these other forces, the poly crisis, right? Just those 5 things alone are converging, and that's going to take the economy off a cliff. ITR believes there's going to be a 6-year depression from 2030 through 2036, and the recovery period in the stock market is going to be upwards of 18 years, which is exactly how long it took the first Great Depression, 25 years to get back to the starting point. The only thing that would change this time frame, it's not who gets elected next. J.D. Vance is going to save us. No, he's not, actually. These are too big of forces to, some elected official, they're not going to save us. AI is not going to save us. Now, AI may actually help us get out of it sooner, kind of like with World War II, with the manufacturing and innovation. It pulled us out of the Great Depression, but it's not big enough to keep us out of it. We're not going to go back to the gold standard. I love gold and silver. Maybe we talk about it, but there's not enough gold to go back to the gold standard, unfortunately. And not only that, the central bankers will never do that because they have too much power with the fiat currency. These things are going to converge at one time. The only thing that would change this time frame, Alex, is a world war or a civil war, because the Great Depression will break out when peace breaks out. This is ITR stance. And the reason why is when you go into a war, you're printing money like crazy, you're manufacturing like a banshee, your munitions and tanks and planes and all this stuff. And so that's very stimulative to the economy, but you're focused on kicking the enemy's butt. We'll deal with the economic hangover later, but as soon as the war's over, boom, that's when you go into the Great Depression. So if we had some sort of war, which maybe we're in one now, maybe this is a big one, who knows, with Iran, then let's say it lasted 3 years, right? So it's 26, it gets us to 29, then the war ends. Well, that's when we go through the Great Depression. It would actually be moved up. Similarly, if we took the off-ramp, which I'm not very optimistic we're gonna find it, but that's another topic. If we took the off-ramp, this is not the big war, but we found ourselves in the big war in 2030 or some sort of civil war, and it lasted 3 years, that could push back the Great Depression until the war's over. And so I asked Tucker Carlson about this in the movie. He's in the movie as well, because World War I was kind of an anomaly. And I want to ask you about this because I asked him the same question. World War I was a little bit different. It wasn't a part of the pendulum theory because World War I was created by the few. The banking situation was in dire straits. The London Stock Exchange had been closed for 5 months leading up to World War I. They were looking for some sort of flashpoint to be able to institute wartime's powers, which Franz Ferdinand, the Archduke of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, was killed. It's like, well, why do we go to war over that? A world war over some guy in Austro-Hungary? Like, come on, that doesn't. They needed some sort of excuse to print their way out of that mess, and that's exactly what they did. Inflation ensued. They wrote off all the bank losses. We used the Wartime's Power Act in the Great Depression, then in the oil crisis, then in 2008, and then during COVID. But the pendulum theory does not talk about proxy wars started by the few or off of oil or stupid things. The pendulum theory is predicting big situations where the masses are ready to go to war, like the Civil War, the Revolutionary War, and with World War II after Pearl Harbor, which I think was a false flag personally, that galvanized the Americans and we were all ready to go to war.
It would certainly be very convenient, Andrew, because right now with the Strait of Hormuz closed, with the LNG exports stopping out of the Persian Gulf, with the oil drying up, the oil supply, that would provide a very convenient excuse for major economic problems, including problems with the food supply. And instead of looking at the institutional factors, the systemic factors that produce that economic crisis, they could say, well, it was because of the war. If we hadn't had the war, we could have continued with this ridiculous fiat system that we have indefinitely. So I think there is a very real concerted effort to get a third world war kicked off. And if you look at the powerful globalist players who've kind of dreamed up a lot of these ideas, they've understood that war is a very useful catalyst to bringing about their agenda. You look, for example, in 1962, the U.S. State Department hired a guy called Lincoln Bloomfield, former intelligence guy, came out of the OSS, the precursor to the CIA, like William Dentzel, to come up with a strategy document. And the purpose of this report was supposed to be to figure out how to move beyond the nation states, the Westphalian system from the 1600s, into a new order where, actually the name of the report gives the whole game away, a world effectively controlled by the United Nations. How do we get from nation states to a global system? And the guy who wrote the report, Lincoln Bloomfield, member of the Council on Foreign Relations, big-time deep stater, concluded in his report that the fastest way, he said organic trends would take hundreds of years to get us where we want to be. But if we use war, the threat of war, and crises, we can accelerate this process very rapidly. And he knew that from experience, right? World War I led to all kinds of institutions being created, most notoriously the League of Nations, which of course was going to be the proto-global government, but the U.S. Senate decided not to join. And so after World War II, we saw the emergence of basically all the architecture of global governance that we know today. The International Monetary Fund, the United Nations, the World Bank, the Bretton Woods system, like all of this emerged in the aftermath of World War II, including, by the way, the regional orders that Lincoln Bloomfield said would be critical to moving this process along. Like in Europe, they foisted on them the European Coal and Steel Community, which very rapidly morphed into the European Economic Community, which became the European Community, which eventually became the European Union superstate that dominates, and that today leading globalists like Henry Kissinger say should be used as the model for regionalizing government around the world, whether we're looking at North America or Southeast Asia or Latin America or Putin's Eurasian Union. All the regions of the world are rapidly moving into these regional governance structures under the guise of free trade. And so they understand that war and economic chaos both help fuel that process that they are very, very much interested in advancing. And so when you look at what's going on in Iran, Iran, I think, could very easily mushroom into a third world war, right? We know that the Russians and the Chinese are helping the Iranians. We know that the Europeans are at least supposed to be helping the United States under various agreements that we've got with them. So this could easily balloon into something much larger. So could Ukraine. So could the Korean Peninsula. So could the Communist Chinese trying to take over the free people of Taiwan. Even India, Pakistan. I was in India last year. I mean, the Indians are gung-ho about it, and so are the Pakistanis. They've got lots of nuclear weapons. So any of these things could very rapidly morph into a third world war.